This is Booked on Rock. I'm Eric Senich. Our guest, Sandra B. Tooze, author of Levon, From Down in the Delta to the Birth of the Band and Beyond. This week, the late great Levon Helm of the band would have turned 81. He was born May 26, 1940, in Elaine, Arkansas. He sadly passed away in April of 2012. I want to play for you an interview I did for my last podcast, Discovery. It's with author Sandra B. Tooze, who released a book last summer on Levon. I planned to put up a brand new interview this weekend, but the author had to reschedule. That was pushed up a week. So instead, I figured with it being Levon's birthday this week, it's a good time to bring this one back and run it on the new podcast. I do have a bunch of great interviews with authors lined up for the next month, so stay tuned. I think you're going to enjoy them. But for now, here's my interview with Sandra B. Tooze. The book is called Levon, From Down in the Delta to the Birth of the Band and Beyond. He sang the anthems of a generation, The Wait, Up on Cripple Creek, and Life is a Carnival. Levon Helm's story, told here through sweeping research and interviews with close friends and fellow musicians, is the rollicking story of American popular music itself. In the Arkansas Delta, a young Levon witnessed blues, country, and gospel hit in a head-on collision, as he put it. The result was rock and roll. As a teenager, he joined the raucous Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks, then helped merge a hard-driving electric sound with Bob Dylan's folk roots, and revolutionized American rock with the band. Helm not only provided perfect in-the-pocket rhythm and unforgettable vocals, he was the band's soul. Levon traces a rebellious life on the road, from being booed with Bob Dylan to the creative cauldron of Big Pink, the Woodstock Festival, world tours, The Last Waltz, and beyond, with the man Dylan called one of the last true great spirits of my or any other generation. Author Sandra B. Tooze digs deep into what Helm saw as a devastating betrayal by his closest friend, band guitarist Robbie Robertson, and Levon's career collapse, his near bankruptcy, and the loss of his voice due to throat cancer in 1997. Yet Helm found success in an acting career that included roles in Coal Miner's Daughter and The Right Stuff. Regaining his singing voice, he made his last decade a triumph, opening his barn to the Midnight Rambles and earning 3 Grammys. Cancer finally claimed his life in 2012. Now let's hear from Sandra. To hear the songs discussed in this episode, check out the show notes page. Sandra, so great to have you on the podcast to talk about this book and the late, great Levon Helm.
Oh, thanks, Eric. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
First off, what led you to writing this book?
Well, when I was looking for a subject to write about, it had to be someone I respected and admired because you spend a lot of time with this person. And I had done an interview with Levon for my Muddy Waters book, and I was so impressed with his friendliness and generosity that I was thinking, I want someone just like Levon. And then, like a bolt from the heavens, it hit me that I thought perhaps there was more to be said about Levon than was in his autobiography. And so I did some more research, and I thought, yes, there was more to say. So that's led me to pursue that project. And it's an amazing story of a sharecropper's kid rising to stardom, then losing it all, including his voice. And then in his later years, regaining the spotlight and getting 3 Grammy Awards. So not everyone goes out on top like that.
When did you first discover the band?
I think I'm old enough to remember when they had their first albums and all of the excitement around that and thinking that Levon was probably the coolest guy on earth. And then in the later years, I did see him play with his blues band, the Barn Burners.
Levon, born in Elaine, Arkansas in 1940, and he grew up in Turkey Scratch, Arkansas, worked on a cotton farm, played and sang music both at home and in church. And the book opens with a statement that Levon once made of the Arkansas Delta, and he said, "It's where the blues, country, and gospel hit in a head-on collision, which became rock and roll." What a great quote. If you could talk a little bit about Levon's childhood days in Arkansas and how it shaped him as both an artist and as a person.
Turkey Scratch is in the Mississippi Delta region of Arkansas. So as you said, Levon grew up profoundly influenced by blues. He used to listen to radio station KFFA in Helena Arkansas, and they had the King Biscuit Entertainers play on there every day. And that was Sonny Boy Williamson and the drummer Pet Curtis. So that was a huge influence. Also, as he was growing up, there were different tent shows that would pass through the nearby town of Marvel, and the Helm family would always go to those. And they always had a really great band, and Levon would sit at the front and watch the drummer, and he said that he thought the drummer had the best seat in the house. And then as he grew up, of course, he started playing himself, and he mostly played guitar. He also played harmonica and Jew's harp. And by the time he was in high school, he was playing drums as well. He played drums in the school band. And then Ronnie Hawkins came along and needed a drummer for his band. And even though Levon was still relatively inexperienced playing drums in a band, he signed on and never looked back.
Yeah, and he started out on the guitar. He was around 7 or 8. It was those performances that turned him on to the drums. The performances referring to the F.S. Walcott Rabbit's Foot Minstrels.
And then, for instance, the first time that Elvis came to town, he didn't have a drummer. And then it was just a month or two afterwards, Elvis came again, and he had DJ Fontana playing drums. And that just was a revelation for Levon.
Radio played a big role, not just with Levon, but all the artists who came out around his time. And I did pick up on something interesting in the book. I just read about Greg Allman talking about something about radio, and he listened to the same station that Levon listened to, which was Nashville's WLAC. He said him and his brother Dwayne listened to LAC, and that's where they discovered Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and B.B. King. And great minds think alike, and they also listen to the same radio stations, I guess.
And then the Canadian members of the Hawks that joined later, they were in Canada, and they were also listening to radio stations such as that from up in Canada.
And of course, along with the radio, every great musician has a muse, and I can't go without asking about Anna Lee. Every morning, Levon, when he was first, second, and third grade while living in Arkansas, he walked along the dirt road in front of his cabin out to the main gravel road to meet Anna Lee, and they'd walk to school together. Now, this is the same Anna Lee who is immortalized in the classic band song The Wait. Also, Levon wrote that beautiful song about her for his 2007 solo album, Dirt Farmer. If you could talk about how important she was in Levon's life.
I got to meet Anna Lee. I went down to Arkansas, and Anna Lee was just wonderful. She spent a day with me in Little Rock, and then when I moved on to do interviews in the Helena area, she came there and she gave me a guided tour of Turkey Scratch and showed me all the places that she and Levon used to go, and also the nearby town of Marvel. Anna Lee says she doesn't remember a time when she didn't know Levon. They were like brother and sister. And there was another friend, too, Mary Vaden, was also part of that group. And I got to interview her in Memphis. But the three of them remained close friends right throughout Levon's life. He would phone them, and they were just very close. The love that Anna Lee and Mary felt towards Levon was just incredible. They still miss him so much.
Levon played guitar for a while, but finally got the chance to play drums professionally when he joins Ronnie Hawkins' band as a teenager. And through Hawkins, this is something interesting I got from your book, one of the many things. Through Hawkins, he learned a lot about work ethic. In fact, some of the members of Ronnie's band, they quit, right? Because they thought it was going to be all fun meeting girls, playing music, but he worked his bands into a well-oiled machine, and Levon stuck with it the whole way, which says a lot about him.
Well, Ronnie said that Levon was his right-hand man, and oftentimes after a performance, the band would have to get together again and practice through many hours of the night. But often Ronnie wasn't there for that, so Levon would kind of lead the rest of the group. But yes, it was a very regimented band. They had strict rules laid down by Ronnie, Eventually, they rebelled against some of those rules and went out on their own. But they always valued the time they spent with Ronnie because they knew that if they hadn't worked that hard, they wouldn't have achieved what they did achieve.
The other part of the music business, of course, is money. And there was the issue that came about with Ronnie, similar, I guess you could say, to what happened with the band, where the guys in Hawkins' band felt that they were being underpaid. I got the feeling that Levon's, maybe I'm wrong on this, I'm interested in what you think on this. I got the feeling that Levon's kindness or the fact that he was pure artist, not for the money, was maybe something people took advantage of. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. There are various examples in the book about Levon's generosity. And yes, there were times when probably he shouldn't have been quite so generous because he was going through hard times financially himself. But the band, the Hawks, left Ronnie. There are several reasons. For the money was one reason, and also especially Robbie and Levon were really interested in exploring other genres of music. They wanted to play blues and more R&B type music. And Ronnie was more set in his ways and wasn't so interested in that. And also they got to the point where they just didn't want to follow all the rules anymore.
And eventually the Hawks gig leads to working with Bob Dylan in his touring band. When Levon passed away, Dylan referred to Levon as his bosom buddy friend to the end, one of the last true great spirits of my or any other generation. That was Dylan's quote. Dylan, known as an enigma, someone who is hard to get a feel for. Do you think Levon knew that Dylan felt that way about him?
I'm not sure because Bob Dylan was much closer with Robbie Robertson. So I wouldn't be surprised if Levon didn't know that Bob felt that way about him.
It's hard to argue the chemistry that Levon and his bandmates had in the band. It really is the most interesting and magical of any band before since. Levon Helm, Robbie Robertson, Rick Danko, Garth Hudson, and Richard Manuel. Each member had their own individual personalities and the country and Western influences, R&B, gospel, Cajun. There probably will never be another band like it, but things went bad pretty quickly internally. Though they did manage to release, I think it was 7 studio albums with that lineup. But was there any scenario you could see where they could have lasted longer or make things work better, or was it just inevitable?
Well, as you and probably most of your listeners know, there was the controversy over the songwriting credit. So unless that was resolved, I just don't think that they could have continued, because the rest of the group, other than Robbie, who felt they had collaborated on the songs and were not included as songwriters, meant that they weren't getting the royalties that Robbie was getting. So there was an issue there. As well as Levon saw it, Robbie was getting rich while the rest of the band struggled financially. They stopped collaborating. By the time Stage Fright was recorded, there were real tensions in the group. And of course, there were drug issues as well. So Levon and the others just sort of gave up collaborating on the songwriting. It was a problem that unless Robbie, I guess, did something to include them more. But then he said he tried. So
you write about what songwriting credit means from a legal standpoint. You also give the other side of the debate, which is from a personal standpoint. You know, if you go by legal reasoning, then I guess Robbie should get the credit. But on the other side of it, what are those songs without the rest of the members' input? Should he have tried to meet them halfway? I think you laid out just right, so it's up to the reader to make the call.
Well, I think one of the big issues is Levon didn't explicitly define what he meant by collaboration. So if he meant a distinctive drum beat or arranging a song that Robbie brought to the group, that does not fit within the legal definition of songwriting. So I don't know if Levon knew what the legal definition of songwriting was. But I really think that it's interesting that Levon, well, first of all, Levon never claimed to be a solo songwriter. He claimed that he co-wrote and helped with some of the songs. But it's interesting that Levon was credited as a co-songwriter on songs before Robbie joined the Hawks. And then after the original band broke up, Levon also was credited with co-writing songs for the rest of his career. And the same with Rick Danko. Rick felt the same way that Levon did. And Rick was hardly credited at all as a co-songwriter. And then when the original band broke up, he was the first out of the gate with a solo album. And he either co-wrote or was the sole songwriter of every single song on that album. So it seems unrealistic that he wasn't contributing more in songwriting with the original band. And then suddenly, as soon as the band ends, he's able to write a whole album for himself.
There was a quote from Rick Danko. It's when you get to the band's 75 album, Northern Lights, Southern Cross, all the songs are credited to Robbie Robertson. And Rick says of the song Twilight, quote, I hate to say this, but it's as much of a Rick Danko song as it is a Robbie Robertson song. I just forgot to seek credit. Robbie was very tight with sharing those responsibilities. That's why he's where he is, and that's why we are where we are, end quote.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I couldn't help but feel some sadness just thinking of how a group of guys as talented and as successful as they were would be in that position. And apparently they all were right up until the end of Rick's life and Levon's life. I mean, it's just hard to wrap your head around that.
Yes, because people assumed that they were millionaires, but they weren't. They struggled. And Rick ended up living in a motel with his wife. Garth filed for bankruptcy several times, and so did Levon.
And Robbie's had his side of the story that he's told. And
yeah,
at the end, when Levon he's on his deathbed, he wasn't even conscious when Robbie went to visit him. Did Levon was he at peace with it towards the end of his life? I mean, it seemed like he was happier and he had a lot of good things going for him. Did he kind of soften his stance on that, or was he just...
Oh, he stood firm.
Yeah.
It's been said that no one could nurse a grudge better than Levon. So no, he felt betrayed. And once you betrayed Levon, you never were accepted again. I should say that I do try to bring both sides of this argument into the book because, I'm not saying definitely that Robbie wasn't a songwriter on some of those songs.
I want to also get into Levon's acting, which he not only proved to be a brilliant musician, but he's a great actor. Actress Mary Steenburgen, who she herself won an Academy Award, she was in a movie with Levon called The End of the Line from 1988, also from Arkansas. She called Levon a brilliant actor, and it appears from the book that he also really enjoyed acting.
Yes. Oh, he was a natural. He admitted that he really didn't know much about acting, and when he was first cast for Coal Miner's Daughter, he'd never acted before. But it was a part that he really got into, and I thought he felt a real kinship between the coal miners and the sharecroppers. They had a lot of the same struggles, and they valued family, and so he sort of, in a way, felt that he had lived that life. And he, as I said, he did a brilliant job of that. And then the other movies, too. He was always cast in the same sort of role as a real Southerner, but he did a really good job and enjoyed himself. And in fact, Mary Steenburgen wrote a blurb for the back cover of the book. She really admired Levon.
Along with the acting career, he reforms the band without Robbie Robertson in the early 80s, and they toured often, recorded 3 studio albums. It really seemed to be a good experience for him to get back with those guys.
Oh, yes, because they really loved each other. They were like family. And then they brought in Jim Weider as the lead guitar player. And he stressed to me what a wonderful experience it was and how much fun it was as well.
How can we leave out The Last Waltz? Robbie Robertson decides in 76 the band is done, and they go out with The Last Hurrah. Thanksgiving 76, they perform their last show. Leads to the legendary film The Last Waltz. Levon didn't want to end it, neither did the rest of the band. And what I didn't know that I found out from your book is how he felt about The Last Waltz overall. I mean, he talks about Robbie not being real in the film, kind of putting a spin on the whole band wanting to stop touring while on camera. He really didn't enjoy that whole experience, which was sad to read.
Yes, when Levon saw the film that they made of The Last Waltz, he thought that it was Robbie getting together with Martin Scorsese and just promoting Robbie for a future career in Hollywood.
And he said he didn't receive a penny from The Last Waltz, and went as far as also to say Robbie wasn't being truthful when Robbie said he didn't receive any money from it.
Yes, I don't know if that's the case, though, but that's what he said. And then there was a lot of money wasted on drugs at that time, too.
Well, you also answered a question I think a lot of band fans had, which was Neil Diamond being in The Last Waltz. Neil Diamond's, I mean, I'm a fan. I mean, legendary, but it was like, whoa, what's he doing there? If you could talk about that as to why he was included in that performance.
Yes, at the time, Robbie had just finished working with Neil Diamond on an album of Neil. So that's why Neil Diamond was included, much to Levon's surprise.
Getting back to the post-band days, or at least the post-band with Robbie days, the night of Richard Manuel's death, 1986, March 3rd of 86, it was after a show in Florida, and they were at a nearby Quality Inn. Rick Danko was on his case about heavy drinking that night, but Levon told the police that Richard was in a great mood otherwise. He stopped by Levon's room. He says he had to go back to his room for something, and he never came back. And then the next morning, Levon finds out that he was gone. He took his life. It's such a sad story. And again, just hard to wrap your head around it in terms of what happened between the time he left Levon's room and the time he went to his room. Was it the result of the cocaine and alcohol in his system? Was it something else? I mean, Levon seemed to be truthful about Richard being fine when he talked to him, unless he didn't want to get into his friend's personal life with the media. I mean, what do you think happened? Is it just as it's been reported?
Well, speaking with Bill Avis, who was their road manager, he said that Richard never really accepted the fact that the reunited band didn't get the audiences that the original band did, that it was more of a struggle for him. Whereas Levon just loved to perform. It didn't matter how many people were in the audience, but it did bother Richard. So that probably was a factor as well. But yes, it's kind of a mystery that what happened between just lying down beside his wife in bed, and then she woke up the next morning and went into the bathroom and he had committed suicide.
It's just sad because he had such a beautiful voice.
Oh, yeah.
Unbelievable. And then sadly, Rick Danko passes in 99. I always go around in my head as to who's my favorite singer in the band. It's always just, it's Levon one day, it's Rick another day, it's Richard another day.
Yes.
Rick Danko, his voice is just unbelievably good.
Yes.
I mean,
beautiful.
They went on without him, which had to have been hard. For Levon, the 90s brought on his health issues, but he would listen to the doctors. He would do what he was told. But for Rick, he was just at that point where I don't want to go to a hospital. I don't want to see a doctor anymore. I'm just going to live out my life the way I live it out.
Yes, well, Jim Weeder said he tried to get Rick to go to a doctor because Rick was having problems with drugs, but Rick just wouldn't go. Then Levon blamed both Richard's and Rick's death on Robbie Robertson because especially Rick was having to go out and perform when he wasn't well, but he had to earn money, and he had to go out even though it affected his health.
Levon kept going, and not only that, but, he has that comeback, wins the Grammy for the 2007 album, Dirt Farmer. Electric Dirt followed. His Midnight Ramble concerts at his barn in Woodstock, New York became a big success. That had to have been gratifying for him to not only make that comeback, but be recognized as a solo musician. You write about how he hadn't been that happy since probably his childhood days at the end.
Well, remember that it wasn't just a comeback for his music, but in the late 1990s, he completely lost his voice to cancer. When he was with the Barnburners Blues Band, he couldn't sing. And that was the reason that the reunited band broke up, because Levon couldn't sing those songs that the public had come to see him perform. So he not only came back musically, but he had to struggle to get his voice back. What perseverance, it's just remarkable.
To give people an idea of just how much Levon meant to his fans, you write of the day of the public wake at his barn, which was April 26, 2012. A plumber from Long Island leaves his home with his family at 6 a.m. to get on the first bus to Levon's wake, and he says, quote, he, meaning Levon wanted everyone to know they were welcome. They were among friends. He was just the realest, most soulful person who ever made music, and it was euphoria to be a part of it, end quote. That pretty much says it all about Levon, the man and the musician.
Yes, well, one thing about Levon that was different than a lot of successful musicians is he didn't just hang out with fellow musicians. He would make friends with the plumber, the stonemason, the nearby farmer. All of those people were also in his group of friends. So when you would go backstage after one of his midnight rambles, there might be the local sheriff might be there talking to him, or, as I said, a farmer or a fireman or something. So that was something that was really different about Levon. He just loved those people. He didn't think of himself as anything that special, really, and he just considered himself one of the guys.
If you had to pick a favorite song by the band, what would it be and why?
The first one that comes to mind is The Weight. I mean, that's just so stirring. I love that song. But I also want to mention one that I really like listening to that isn't quite as familiar on the Jericho album that the Reunited band did. I just love Blind Willie McTell. Apparently, the producer had to really argue with the record company to include that on the album, but I just love it. It's both Rick and Levon trade verses on that, and it's just beautiful.
The Jericho album also has Atlantic City on there. They do the cover of Springsteen's Atlantic City, which I have the Amazon Music Unlimited. They tell you what's the most popular tracks. That's up there. I mean, among all the other ones from the quote-unquote classic days with Robbie Robertson, that Atlantic City is right up there.
Well, that was the other one that the producer had to struggle to convince the record company to put on the album.
Really?
Which is amazing because that was a staple of Levon's set list for the rest of his life.
Levon had such an unusual style vocally and with his drumming, which people should really go out and get this book because you also get into that about his approach to his style of drumming and vocals. And, he was just a rarity.
What was very rare, and I spoke with drummer Steve Jordan about this, is that Levon, there are a few drummers that can sing and play drums at the same time, but Steve Jordan stressed that it's very rare to find one that can sing and play with such independence and fluidity. So it was like two separate people, and that's a very rare thing.
The way he would hit the beats, he'd kind of wait on the backbeat a little bit. He also, he spun the stick around to use the fat part of the stick to get a certain sound, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he was really known for his feel. So several drummers I spoke to mentioned that he played with, Jimmy Karstein, who played drums with J.J. Cale, said he played with a marvelous simplicity, that it was an understated style. One of the drummers that Levon really admired was Earl Palmer, who was a New Orleans drummer who played with Little Richard and Fats Domino. And Earl Palmer played only as much as the song required and never overplayed. And that was a philosophy that Levon followed throughout his career. So you won't hear any extra embellishments or cymbal crashes with Levon. And that had an influence on other drummers as well.
A great read. It's called Levon From Down in the Delta to the Birth of the Band and Beyond. It's available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If you're a fan of Levon Helm and the band, you won't be disappointed. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk about the book. You hope that in the decades to come, the younger generations will continue to discover his music and the band's music, because it's a part of history.
Yes. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about it with you.
Thanks to Sandra B. Tooze for taking us through her book, Levon, From Down in the Delta to the Birth of the Band and Beyond. Be sure to subscribe to Booked on Rock on Spreaker or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. You can find us online at bookedonrock.com or Facebook at facebook.com/BookedOnRockPodcast. On Twitter @BookedOnRock. The email address is thebookedonrockpodcast@gmail.com, or you can also contact us through the website. If you're an author of a book on rock and you want to be on the podcast, just send me an email or contact me through the Booked on Rock website. I'm Eric Senich. Look forward to having you back next time for a brand new episode of Booked on Rock.